Good evening, Razorback fans. I want to welcome you to the one, the only Hawg Talk podcast, live from the Sterling Soap and Roastery Studios, a part of the Believe and Buzz Radio networks, where you can hear us on all podcast platforms, as well as Buzz 106.7 in Central Arkansas. So please like, rate, and review our podcast. And all live shows are presented to you by Arkansas Brewing Company in Ozark, Arkansas. I am Porter Hayes, and our broadcast is brought to you by Bet Online, which remains your number one source for all sports betting this season. You'll always find the latest odds, team matchup, player news, game trends, and Bet Online. We're the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite leagues and events. So head on over to betonline.ag to join and receive your 50% welcome bonus with your first deposit. Make sure to use your promo code BLEAV to receive your rewards. Bet Online, where the game starts. And we go to the Measures Hotline and bring in Tye Richardson of ESPN Arkansas. Tye, I know it's summertime for you. I know being on different shows. You're about to head off to SEC Media Days here in a couple of weeks, and I know you're always looking forward to going there and singing a little karaoke. So I appreciate you coming on.
Porter, happy to do it, man. You and I are kind of watching the LSU-Florida game as we're doing this, where LSU just had a huge inning to overtake the Gators. But I wouldn't put anything past the Florida coming back based on the way that College World Series has gone to this point.
Yeah, and before we broadcast, I mean, it looked like, Florida was out 2-0, and, our good friend Blake Ruffino, AYS Sports, and then they went on that 6 runs. I think they even could have scored more if they just sent Tommy Tanks, but they held up and ended up getting 6 in that. But with Arkansas, there's plenty of buzz going on with the NBA draft. 3 players got drafted. I don't know all the hate that Muss gets from the outside world and all the other. Is it one of them things like you can put on it's just because of the success he's having? You put him in with Saban, like when he started winning a lot, then they didn't like him. Then Clemson started winning, they didn't like Dabo. Do you think that's part of it? Or do you think it's part of his personality mixed with the fact that he's getting all these transfer players and putting them in the NBA draft?
Well, winning breeds contempt. I don't know many winners out there that love all the time, and winning comes at a price. Eric's exceeded, I think, a lot of people's expectations instantaneously. I mean, they got to the Elite Eight in year 2. They hadn't been there since 1995. So, I mean, you had a stretch of Arkansas basketball where Mike Anderson had a couple good years, but that wasn't Arkansas' ceiling. They weren't hitting it. And I don't think they've hit it under Eric Musselman just yet. To the question, though, about there's always going to be opposing fans that don't like him just because of certain things that he does. And I think he's got a lot of NBA connections. I could tell he was a little bit I wouldn't say – there was a question or two that probably irked him in the press conference that I was listening to today, just about guys and their shooting. I mean, he can only do so much of guys. I mean, at a certain point, guys got to make shots. And that was the big question mark of this basketball team. It ultimately was their Achilles heel in some games. But he addressed that in the offseason. They got a bunch of shooters, and I'm excited about this retooled team that he's got for next year.
And it's funny that you said that about expectations, and there's only you could do it. It seems like the fans in every sport, whether it's Dave Van Horn, Sam Pittman, Eric Musselman, it's like, you've been a fan of Arkansas all your life. You went to U of A. Now you're doing ESPN Arkansas. You've lived through the darkest times of Arkansas sports. And now where we're at, it's like still to some, they're not satisfied. It's like, well, they're choking or they just can't get there. How hard is that exactly, with your day profession that you do, talk radio, but yet you're a fan? I mean, how hard is it to kind of hold back sometimes, be like, hey, look, we got to remember where we were in all these sports and the programs and where we're at now, and kind of embrace it and enjoy it, because we could easily go back to where we were.
Porter, I have different expectations for each sport. The football team, I expect you to compete once every 4 or 5 years for the SEC West and maybe end up going to Atlanta, Georgia. That's subject to change with Texas and Oklahoma league. Basketball team, I think the floor every year should be the round of 32. And now with where Eric's got this thing going, I mean, I truly believe that they have a great chance to end up in Phoenix, Arizona for the Final Four next year. Baseball-wise, frankly, I'm disappointed they don't make at least a super regional. Now, some may say, well, those are too high of expectations. Just making postseason's great. But, I mean, Dave's created a monster. You think about the College World Series appearances, particularly in the last 5 years that he's had. It's been pretty special. So I would love to see him get one. I don't know if it's going to happen. I hope it happens next year so the every 30 years kind of lines up. But, I mean, Arkansas fans are allowed to have expectations. This idea that you as a fan can't think some way about your team. Like, I'm not a big participation trophy guy. I didn't like the fact that they gave out the Liberty Bowl rings after the win. I thought that was stupid.
Yeah.
I thought that was horrible. And I get you want to reward guys for getting the win, but no one cares about the Liberty Bowl. Like, you went 6-6 after going 9-4 the year before. I think this team has a lot higher expectations from this fan base this year based on you returning the best duo, and not just the SEC, but maybe in college football, and KJ Jefferson and Rocket Sanders.
Yeah, I'd got in a little chat the other day about, giving out rings, and that was brought up, and then it reminded me of, South Carolina gave out rings for just winning 11 games. I mean, and they got just absolutely blasted for the fact that you're giving out rings for just the amount of wins you have. And I get what you're saying with the whole each program has its own expectations, and that's completely 100% true. My reasoning was just the fact of with the football program, you're still playing in the SEC, and you got to look at all those losses that could have been wins. Yeah, we're saying what if and coulda, woulda, but I give grace a 1 or 2 win grace each year up or down because you still are playing until next year in the SEC West. And, and then you throw in 4 non-conference games. It's almost like if you're playing in the SEC West, you got to go 4-0 in your non-conference games because the SEC West is so hard. You don't know what's going to happen. So there's a lot of pressure on you want to schedule good teams in the non-con, but yet you got to watch out because if you split those, you're heading into SEC play 2-2, and that's never a good thing.
I mean, you just think about who they had in the non-conference last year with Bobby Petrino, Missouri State, Cincinnati being a college football playoff team, Liberty. I mean, and going to Provo to BYU. That's one of the most brutal, if not the toughest non-conference slate that this football team's ever played. This year, you got 3 cupcakes and you got BYU at home. This is Sam Pittman's easiest schedule in his 4th year. And while they have maybe one of the toughest stretches in all of college football where you go Baton Rouge, Jerry World, Oxford, Tuscaloosa, you got to figure it out because you have some other elements to the schedule that are in your favor. For example, Florida's not going to be good this year. That's your Eastern opponent in Missouri, which is traditionally not a good football team. You just keep losing to them every year. So you have to take advantage of the bye week that you have at the end of October, go into the swamp for the first time ever, and then come back and beat Auburn at home, which I think Auburn has the potential to be an underrated football team this year. Hugh Freeze gets that quarterback situation worked out because they do have a lot of talent they brought in the transfer portal. So I just think Arkansas's got to take advantage of the schedule this year. And again, you have to put this in perspective. It's still the SEC West. It's still the toughest league in college football, as you just mentioned. But it's the easiest schedule Sam Pittman's had since he's been here. So we'll see what happens.
And I brought it up to a couple of guys, and something that just sticks out to me is you always end up playing that Texas A&M game, your first SEC game in Jerry World. And we've known how that has went in the field goal last year. Do you think the fact that they have switched that up to where the LSU game is first and then they play the Texas A&M, do you think there is any advantage that just based on the fact that Arkansas always plays LSU a lot tougher, they're always play more up for that game opposed to Texas A&M? It just always seems like they have something over them like the Missouri game. Do you think there's any advantage there at all?
I hope so. I mean, I hate Texas A&M, and Arkansas has found a myriad of ways to lose to those guys each and every year since 2014 in Jerry World. Now, the first 3 tries were a lot of fun. The last ones have not been. If not for Traylon Burks 2 years ago, I'd still be in pain and misery going to that game. I'm hoping for a difference. Here's the deal. That LSU-Arkansas game, the fourth week of the season, is probably going to be the premier quarterback matchup in the SEC. Now, you've got Joe Milton and Spencer Rattler taking on each other with Tennessee and South Carolina. Arkansas hosting Mississippi State. Rogers and KJ should be good. But a lot of people, in fact, you referenced media days. If I had to guess, when SEC media days, the all-SEC team comes out, you're going to see either Jaden Daniels or KJ Jefferson as first and second team, one or the other. That's how it's going to be. I don't anticipate any other quarterback filling up the slot for first and second team. And so that's the premier game that day. I know Alabama plays Ole Miss, and I think A&M plays South Carolina. But to me, that's the CBS game of the week. And that's the game if Arkansas somehow, some way figures it out in Baton Rouge, hopefully they can do the same that next week in Jerry World. I like your angle and where you're coming from there, Porter.
Yeah, and it's funny because we always seem like we have this hope of when we look at the schedule, like, man, if Arkansas is 5-0 going into the Alabama game, we're 6-0 going into the Alabama game. And it's crazy because you can actually make a case for that every year. It just hardly ever seems to work out that way. But this year with, KJ coming back and there's so many other questions, Alabama, for instance, I mean, they don't know who their true quarterback is. And even if it is Milroe, what was that? Was that his name, Milroe?
Yeah, Milroe.
Milroe. I mean,
the kid from Notre Dame.
And if they stop his running, and that's how he killed Arkansas last year, was just on that zone read run. How do you think the defense really sets up this year opposed to last year, and especially with these new coordinators coming in? How do you think that's all going to mesh with exactly having these first three games before you do play LSU?
I would love to say it's going to be a match made in harmony, and I was on with Chuck Oliver last week, who does radio in Atlanta, and he brought up the fact that Arkansas hasn't been a top 5 SEC defense since 2014, and I was like, that's like a decade. How's that possible? And I just started to go through the teams, go through the years. I was like, oh, that makes sense. They haven't been that great there. Now, there's been games, there's been maybe a streak here and there, but Arkansas hasn't necessarily found a lot of consistency. So for Travis Williams and the rest of his staff, you would love to see them make an instant impact in year one. You're going to have some quality DNs. I'm excited to see Landon Jackson, Morgan, Jeffcoat, Torian Carter being back is going to help your interior. You're still weak in the middle there at D tackle. It's not like you're Alabama or Georgia or LSU. You just don't have a plethora of those guys. And then you bring in a lot of quarterbacks. I mean, what does Jaheim Thomas do at the linebacker position, the Cincinnati transfer? What about Jaheim Singletary coming over from Georgia as a 5-star? Walcott, Snacks Johnson. I mean, there are guys that you brought in. I don't anticipate, and I don't have any inside knowledge of this, I just don't anticipate Quincy McAdoo playing this fall, which I hate for him, and I hate for just his family, but that's just not even an educated guess on my part. But I would not be counting on him this fall. And I think you can't be as bad in secondary as you were last year, Porter. I mean, they cannot be last in the FBS in passing yards per game.
And it was almost last in every division. I mean, I think they went back to D2 NAIA, and I think they were almost dead last. And that's the thing. It's with the depth, you're playing, the past 3-4 years, it seemed like they were playing with linebackers that were hurt halfway through the year. You look at Grant Morgan playing with shoulder injuries, and then yeah. I mean, it's just, that's where everybody talks about this Missouri game at the end, but Arkansas is beat up. They don't have the luxury of playing that SEC East schedule, and you don't have the depth. I mean, your educated guess, how many years do you think it takes to fully build a defense and get the depth where you need it to where you can compete? And especially with this leagues going away and you're going to just straight SEC play, how do you think that all works out? Or how long do you think it would take to build a defense?
Just to put it in perspective, Arkansas is already behind the in-state kids in high school relative to their competitors. Even Mississippi, has a smaller population, doesn't have as many, or has more, high school talents. You're behind the 8 ball with the in-state kids. Add on top of the fact that you finish kind of 8 or 9 ballpark every single year in recruiting rankings. Now, thus far, Arkansas's done a pretty good job in the transfer portal. Sam Pittman and company have found guys that have been starters or big-time contributors, but the number of years that you're asking about on defense, it's easy to say one, maybe two for LSU, Georgia, or Bama because they can stack guy on guy. But Arkansas, just in that, for the most part, they can't do that because they don't bring in enough talent defensively to have just this incredible amount of depth that you see. I mean, the Philadelphia Eagles have basically become the Philadelphia Bulldogs, drafting Georgia players. And, I mean, that's a byproduct of the talent that's been in Athens. And that same has happened with Alabama and certain teams in the National Football League. Saban just keeps recruiting guys, and they keep becoming great NFL players. So I don't know how. I think your question started with how long does Coach Williams need to build up some true depth. And I would at least say 2 years, but in the case of Arkansas, it's probably closer to 3, Porter.
Yeah, and that's fair. I mean, 3 to 4, because I mean, you got to stick with your depth. And it was interesting while we're talking about that. We're talking about the transfer portal and the draft or the recruiting. How much longer? I mean, I'm looking 5-10 years down the road, but how much longer do you think that these 2024, 2025, 26 high school recruiting rankings are not going to mean as much as they more, because they're going to put more emphasis on the transfer recruiting, and with the transfer portal being more prevalent, I mean, everybody's paying more attention to the daggum transfer portal and the players that they're getting than necessarily the players that they're coming out of high school.
Yeah, the transfer portal has changed college sports as we know it. And you look at I'll give you the perfect example would be Arkansas basketball. You bring in 6 freshmen last year. This year, you only bring in 2. You've got 6 transfer players, assuming that Lawson ends up signing with Arkansas, and 5 returnees. So the dynamics of the roster itself have already changed for Razorback basketball. And again, I don't have these hard numbers in front of me right now, but if you went on 24/7 or On 3 or Rivals and just kind of did a dive of 5-10 years ago relative to now, that's changed. I mean, portal, there's 2,500 kids in football portal at some point, more than that. So if you're a college football coach and you have an opportunity to get a young man that's ready to play right away versus a freshman that's a fringe guy, you're taking the guy that's ready to play right away. Even if maybe he's been taught some things that you don't necessarily agree with, you feel like that might be easier. And it's a case-by-case basis. But, yeah, the portal's definitely affected high school recruiting as we know it.
And moving to the basketball front and just looking at what they do have coming in, and, you're looking at the doom and gloom of you got 3 guys that are drafted, and now you're trying to rebuild on that. But it seems like Eric Musselman's almost building like a Dave Van Horn-ass roster of just reloading every year, not rebuilding. And you're getting 4- and 5-star kids to come to Arkansas. You're getting your in-state kids. It seems like in a lot of the sports with these transfer portal players, how long ago was it where nobody even thought about coming to Arkansas? And now you can honestly say whether they get them or not, or they don't even have an interest of coming to Arkansas, they're at least going to listen to them. I mean, how does that make you feel who's followed this program? I mean, Arkansas is at the spot where they at least have a shot to get anybody they want based on how everything's went with the success of the transfer portal players.
Yeah, Arkansas has had some success, not, of course, just in-state, but out-of-state, particularly in Texas. And I know people are still a little bit jaded by Ron Holland electing to go to the G League at night. But you look at Walsh and Black and some of these other guys that they're kind of on in 2025 and 2026. Texas, while it's known for its football high school prowess, its high school basketball is pretty stinking good too. And Muss was talking about it today, how that Arkansas was said a lot on the broadcast Thursday night, and it's kind of dead in the world of sports right now outside of college baseball and the MLB. And so anytime that you can get your name out there, especially in a time period like this, you'll take it. And he's done a great job, again, developing these guys, and that's something that you really appreciate about him and his staff, and really the connections, because I think a lot of NBA coaches, GMs, and execs trust his thought process, trust his evaluation, because he's been there before. And a lot of coaches in college basketball have it. He has a leg up on, I think, a lot of them with not just the kids he's trying to recruit out of high school, but in addition to that, the ones that he's getting out of the portal as well.
And you see the opponents, they released the 2024
Woo!
SEC schedule. I mean, you look at it, and of course you get Kentucky twice, as always, which is but let's see. Do you think Alabama is creeping up, not to really take Kentucky's place, but be up there? Would you put them on the same level as the Kentucky game, just based on how the last couple of years have went, and especially with everything last year?
Here's how I would frame it, and Chuck said it on the Morning Rush, that Alabama's become our basketball rival based on the kids that we're both going after, based on the coaches going at each other. He didn't say that Eric Musselman didn't like Nate Oates, but I'm going to go and read into Eric Musselman doesn't like Nate Oates. That's my, again, it's an uneducated guess, but that's my guess on this. And Alabama football has been the gold standard in this league multiple different times. Of course, under Bear Bryant, now under Nick Saban, they're the creme de la creme, the cream of the crop. Alabama basketball has had some really good regular season success. It hasn't translated to postseason. Arkansas does not have the advantage of the Crimson Tide, I don't think, in the regular season. You go to Tuscaloosa this year, which I know, I'm assuming Grant Nelson's still going to ultimately sign with the Crimson Tide, so that will be a fun battle with him, Trevor Brazile, and the rest of back and forth between. But I don't think that you can convince our fan base, even though that the Alabama game is a budding rivalry. I think the Auburn one is that as well, based on what happened when they came in here 2 years ago and you beat the number one team in the country. But it's going to be really hard to convince that 55-year-old Arkansas fan that the Bama basketball game means more than Kentucky. I just don't know if you're going to do that. I don't think you should either.
Yeah.
Kentucky, and I know that Cal and company haven't been what they have as of late, but it's still the blue blood basketball program in the SEC. So if you overtake them, you want to overtake them, you want to overtake Alabama, you want to overtake everyone else. And Arkansas is on track to do that, I think. They keep on doing what they've been doing.
Until they stop, heckling Cal at Herman's and stop, having thousands of kids looking over the bay as the Kentucky players walk into the arena. I mean, you can't say that that's not the top, rivalry. Who do you want to beat the most? And I think it's clear cut. It's Kentucky, and then Auburn sneaked up there for a minute, but I think Alabama's taken that spot. And I guess you can go 1A and 1B, but you're talking about expectations. The team and the program have different expectations of who their rival is compared to fans. And then you have different layers of that. Like you just said, the 55-year-old guy still thinks Tennessee's the number one, or Texas is the number one rival in football. But then you bring up your case of you hate Texas A&M more than, so Texas A&M might be that top rival. I'm one of them that I'm morally look at the LSU because of the boot, but Missouri, as much as we hate to say it, Missouri's become a rival because you hate them just as much as they hate you, just because you can't really seem to beat them. But still yet, I think if they would have never made that trophy and they would have just let things happen, I think they would have kind of accepted it as a rivalry sooner than later, because I think it was more forced. But you can't deny the hate that is between the two schools. And going back to Alabama, I think that's the case there. Look at the Tennessee baseball rivalry, how fast that bloomed up. It doesn't, to me, it doesn't matter how long you've been playing the school. It's the hate, and both teams are good. And it's a competitive game. You want to beat them just as much as you want to beat them. And that's what I consider a rivalry.
And it's fun. It's great for the opposing fan base. It's great for Arkansas. And it brings even more intensity to the battle on the field or the court. I mean, that's what I want to see. I want to see teams. I want to see coaches that all like each other. That's part of fun.
Yes.
There's too much camaraderie. There's too much hugging. There's too much happy-go-lucky. That's not what sports is about. Now, there's a stark difference between a competitive game with sportsmanship and one that gets out of hand. I'm not advocating for fights. I'm not advocating for dirty plays and stuff like that. But, I mean, I like when John Petty and Jalen Tate got tossed a couple years back in that Alabama-Arkansas game. I like that, John. I like the back and forth. That's what makes sports fun. And if Alabama and Arkansas want to keep doing that in basketball, fine by me. You mentioned the Missouri game in football. You haven't had much to talk about.
Exactly.
So shut up and get it done on the field. I don't think that Arkansas is outlandish during that game, but shut up and let your play do the talking. And then baseball-wise, it's still probably Ole Miss. They weren't worth anything this year, and hopefully when LSU comes into Fayetteville next year, you'll give them a run for their money because it looks like they might be a national champion. You might have a chance to knock off the defending national champion when they come to Baum Walker next year.
Yeah, and we'll wrap it up with this. Going to the new SEC look, keeping it 8. There's always been that talk between 8 and 9 games. Where's your stance on it staying at 8? And what game, now that it's fair game on no divisions or no, who are you most looking forward to Arkansas play that they don't normally play? And start with your take on the 8 opposed to 9 game schedule.
I would say to start the 8 or 9 game schedule, if you're an Arkansas football fan and you're looking at this logically, I don't know how you can be in favor of your football team playing 9 games over 8 due to the fact that you don't have the depth compared to the top team coaches, top football programs in this conference. And Texas and Oklahoma, it's not getting any easier adding them. They now can walk into a young man's living room in Arkansas, in Texas, or Oklahoma and say, we're part of the SEC. Because you had that advantage over A&M, over Texas, and over Oklahoma. You don't have that anymore when you walk into those houses. So I think for the Razorbacks, I'm always going to believe that it's better for this football program to play 8 games because you're not basketball talent, you're not baseball talent. You just don't have that. And that's not me having a loser mentality. That's just being smart. Play 4 cupcakes every year if you can. Or I know you have to play a Power 5 team. Play 3 cupcakes. Play the cupcakeiest Power 5 team. And then deal with your SEC schedule. Arkansas caught a break in 2024. You're probably not going to catch one in 2025. In regards to the team,
Can't hear you. I think we lost your volume. I couldn't hear what you're saying. Yeah, I can't hear nothing that what's going on. So I don't know what happened to our audio, but we'll get that figured out. I don't know what happened. I can't hear either. So hold on. I lost the audio. Things that happen on live radio. We have just lost our whole audio feed during the live show. But we'll get it figured out, and let's see. We can't hear nothing. Let's see what we got going on. I can't hear nothing. Well, that will do it. I don't know what happened to our sound, but I can't hear nothing, see nothing. So we'll just chop it up as that. And y'all have a good evening.